All right, everyone, welcome to the Real Estate Game Changer Show. I'm your host, Mike McKay, based in the Jacksonville, Florida market. And each and every week, we do this show with people who are changing the game of real estate all over the country. If anyone is in the Jacksonville market or looking to get into the market and needs help on anything, feel free to reach out to us. We are still a very active buyer in the Jacksonville market, so deals as well, feel free to send them our way. Um, this is a live show, guys. So if you have any questions, please put them in the comments on whatever app you're on, and I'll read them out for our guest to answer. This week, our guest is David Pere. David, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. And I'm going to just derail everything like right off the bat because we didn't even, before we started chatting, I don't think I asked you what market. Do you hang out with Gonzalo Corzo?
Yeah, dude, I saw him the other night. Yeah.
Dude, his brother, Diego, and I, like, he's like my favorite person. Like, every time I'm in Austin, I hang out with Diego.
Yeah.
And Gonzalo and Diego are awesome. And I will share some funny stories when we're not recording later. But
Okay.
they are great humans.
Yeah.
Gonzalo and Diego are some of my favorite people. So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Awesome, guys. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
for sure. Well, let's just kick it off with something easy here. Tell us a little bit about how you got into real estate investing coming from a military background.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the same story as everyone else, right? I read that purple book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. I was like, wow, this sounds cool. And then I was dumb enough to think that it was easy. So I was like, I'm going to do it. And I bought a house. I was like, I read a couple other books in the middle of, that process. Some other Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like, purple library books, and some other stumbled across some Bigger Pockets books. Decided house hacking was the way to go. Bought a duplex with the FHA loan.
Mhm.
Because I was told you could only use the FHA loan once or the VA loan once, which is totally wrong. But
Yeah.
and that kind of leads into why I'm so passionate about helping people understand the VA loan now. But at the time, I didn't know, and I bought this like $81,000 duplex for all in for like $4,000, including like LVP in the unit I was living in, and moved in. Went from paying $550 a month to live in a 2-1 apartment to paying like $125 a month out of pocket, including utilities, to own a 2-1 duplex on each side. And then like 6 months later, I got stationed in Hawaii. And when I moved out at cash flowed, and I was like, wow, this works. And then I kind of went a little bit more all in, and just slowly over time, more and more and more.
Yeah. And, I was reading on your website, over the course of about, was it 5 or so years, you've picked up over 100 rental units?
Yeah, we bought by the time so that was December of 2015. When I
Hmm.
exited the military in October of 2021, I had like 110, 112 doors. It included a 40 unit hotel, a 23, a 15, and a 10 unit apartment, and then a whole bunch of 1 to 4 unit properties. And then I'd probably done 40 or 50 wholesale deals or flips. And then I'd also invested as a GP or raised capital as a co-sponsor GP for like another 900 doors on 2 syndications. But the ownership on those is so small that it's not really even worth talking about.
Yeah.
I hate when people are like, I have this many doors. Like, if you boil it down, it's like 3.5 doors worth of those syndications, maybe 2.5 doors, but it's 916 doors, but I might own 2 or 2.5 of them.
Sure.
Um, so, and it's like, like the bottom half inch of each door, maybe.
Mhm.
So it's
That's right. Yeah.
negligible. So, and then now I've sold a bunch of stuff kind of this year, like moving out of some of the crappier neighborhood stuff and into. We've got a part of a 28 pad RV park. We just fell out of contract
Mhm.
buying a mobile home park, trying to kind of consolidate into some of that more larger, less operational headache stuff. I say less operational headache, not because the asset's less operational headache, but because I can have someone else deal with the operational headache on those bigger ones than me. So,
Right. Yep.
yeah.
Cool. And let's talk a little bit about, because one of the first things you brought up is, even though you were in the military, you had some misconceptions about what you can and can't do with the VA loan. What are those misconceptions that you see
Oh,
with people, and what's some advice for people who might potentially be interested in using their VA loan or loans, because it's not just one?
yeah. The number one piece of advice is just always refer back to the guidelines, right? If a lender tells you it can't be done, ask them to show you where that says it in the guidelines, the VA guidelines from the Department of Veteran Affairs. because most of the time it's an overlay from that specific bank or lender and not an actual guideline. The VA itself has very loose guidelines.
Mm.
Prime example, there's no minimum credit score or maximum debt to income ratio for the VA. I've seen a 78% back end debt to income ratio approved on a VA loan. Can't get that on any other product out there. I've seen as low as a 520 credit score approved. But a lot of lenders will tell you like, oh no, you can't go below 640, or oh, you have to have a 49% debt to income. Like, that's simply not true. It's just that bank specifically has that. But no bank is going to say, oh, these are our requirements, you should try that bank. They're going to say,
Sure.
nope, sorry, can't. You should improve this and come back, because they want your business. And so you just need to ask where it says that in the guidelines. That's probably the easiest way to cover your butt. Some of the most common ones, though, or things that have changed recently, to just like rattle through, you can use it more than once. It's going to depend on your remaining entitlement, but you can. So just consult
What
a
does remaining
lender.
entitlement mean?
Yeah, that's where it gets all confusing. So I try not to
Okay.
like explain this in detail, because it's really going to depend on like every single situation becomes different after that first purchase. But
Mhm.
basically it means, and this is one of the other misconceptions, there's no longer a limit on your first purchase. So it's not capped.
Mm.
I've seen as high as 2.5 million purchased, zero down on first home.
Wow.
But when you go to buy your second house, that's when the cap for the county loan limit comes in. And
Mhm.
so at that point, whatever that cap is your remaining entitlement. And whatever your first home purchase was, is you subtract that from the whatever. So if you have even 2 mortgages or 3 mortgages and they're less than that remaining, that limit, then you can still use your entitlement. But if you have 1 mortgage and it's above the entitlement, so it just becomes like a big, weird, complex math problem. And so
Sure.
my answer to basically everyone is, when you go to buy your second house, just call a lender and say, here's my certificate of eligibility. Please tell me how much house I can buy.
Right.
Because it just becomes a math problem, and I really can't sit here all day and do the math problem for you when I'm not going to be getting paid the commission for doing the loan.
Sure. Yeah.
And the lender will. So,
Yes.
but I've got an article on it on my website, but it's really not that complex. It's just understanding the equation and your loan limit per your county. But yeah, your first purchase, there's no limit. I've seen someone have up to 4 VA loans out at the same time,
Mhm.
but it's they're all like $150,000, $200,000 houses. Um, let's see, you can use 75% of your gross rents for other units, as long as you have either 2 years property management experience or hire a professional property manager.
Mm.
A lot of lenders will tell you, nope, sorry, you don't have the experience. And then they'll even tell you can't count a property manager. Go find a different lender, because you can. Hell, you can build a barn dominium with the VA loan. There's a weird
Mm.
one. You can build you can buy a farm as long as the house and 20 acres is at least 50% of the value of the land. And so, like, there's all kinds of weird things that the VA is the most diverse and best primary residence mortgage out there. And unfortunately, people think all these misconceptions about it not being that. And the reason for that is simply because agents and lenders who don't understand it
Mhm.
will say things about it to push you to use a product they do understand, rather than lose your business to somebody who's savvy with it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
And
it's the best product out there by far.
yeah. And from you started out with that duplex house hack, right? And scaled to over 100 units in 5 years and wholesaled 30 to 40 deals and raised some money, right? I mean, how did you manage to do all that while working a full-time military schedule?
I just thought I'm gonna
Yeah, jump in.
backtrack,
Yeah.
because you do a lot of off market stuff. You want to hear another crazy one
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
awesome with the VA? Actually, it's twofold, I suppose. Um, have you ever tried to sell a wholesale deal or a recent flip to an FHA buyer?
Yeah. Pain.
Yeah, what happens?
Well, you can't.
Exactly. You can with
Yeah.
the VA.
Really? No 90
Yeah.
day?
Yeah. As long as the wholesale fee was in the original contract, you can wholesale a deal to a VA buyer as long as it passes the inspection. So, like, if it's a turnkey house, you can wholesale to a VA buyer, and they can pay you an assignment fee.
Oh, really?
And you
Okay,
can
I didn't
flip
know
a
that.
house to a VA buyer, and they don't have the 90-day window.
Okay.
So, yeah, both of those things are awesome. So
That is cool. I didn't know about the assignment fee
yeah,
thing. That's
yeah,
unique.
yeah. There's some pretty cool things like that too. Man, I woke up at 4 a.m. and I worked for an hour or two before I went to work, and then I sat in my car and ate my lunch. I literally had my I used Ryan Dossey's call porter to handle all my inbound calls,
Hmm.
and then I had them schedule my appointments for motivated sellers during my lunch break, and I would call them back while I was sitting in the car on my lunch. I negotiated that deal. We'll probably touch on later what I mentioned with the direct mail and all the crazy whatever. Um, was like 6 different phone calls sitting in my car on my lunch break, and
Wow.
and then I'd do some work at night and I'd work weekends. It's not exactly glamorous, but I mean, I had a lot of, like a journal and I'd time block and I would try to remove distractions. But the reality is that I just put in the hours. It's
Yeah.
probably the main hub for it, right? There's a lot of like tips and tricks, but that's what it really boiled down to.
Yeah. I think that's a good point though, especially like using a service like Call Porter, right? So that someone's available to answer the phone and then they, you know, book the appointment for when you're available, right? For anyone working a full-time job, whether it's military or something else. Um,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and were you primarily acquiring properties direct to seller during that time, or you were using other sources?
Um, yeah, I mean, I bought a couple, I suppose, off the MLS during that time, but most of what I've bought has been most of what I've bought's been fairly direct to seller. Uh, my 10 unit was a handwritten letter, my second deal ever. I was mailing duplexes, and the guy called me and said he had a 10 unit he wanted to sell. It was on the MLS, but it was from a direct letter to him, and I negotiated with him. I never talked to his agent.
Hmm.
Um, there were agents involved in the transaction, but as a formality because he had it listed. Uh, and then most of my other deals, yeah, have been either direct mail or cold call. Majority direct mail. I landed a couple here and there via text
Hmm.
blast, but I'd say probably 60 or 70% direct mail, 20, 30% cold call, and whatever else, maybe 10% text.
Yeah.
Um, I almost landed one door knock when I was in Hawaii, to like driving for mail or driving for dollars and door knocking. Um, it didn't go through, but uh, yeah, and most of it, yeah, direct to seller. Um, I didn't really get into like really trying to do that acquisition stuff until I joined CCF, Dossie's coaching program in
Hmm.
like mid to end of 2020.
Hmm.
I was just kind of putzing around here and there. I wish I'd started something like that sooner. There's a lot of good programs out there. I'm not just advocating for his. There's some definitely good coaching programs out there that teach you about how to do this stuff. And man, just learning somebody else's system was the way to go.
Yeah.
I was trying to putz around and do it myself, and I was just at such a smaller scale. And it was like once I just sat down, it was like, oh, I should just do this, and then like having someone who would just willing to be like, nudge, 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 try again. Like, oh, I landed a deal. What do I do now? Do it again. Oh, I landed another deal.
Right.
And then we got up to 3 or 4 deals a month. I mean, I was doing two, 2 to 3 a month on average when I was still active duty, and then we got up to like 3 or 4 a month. I didn't
Hmm.
really ever want to be bigger than that, maybe 5 at the most. And then I had some issues with my team, and I ended up selling my wholesaling company to John. So I was like, my team, I had my project manager slash acquisition specialist decided that he thought he could do it better himself, uh, or whatever reason he wanted to give himself. And so he was like, I'm going to go do this. And he took my lead manager slash TC and uh, tried to take one of my contractors with him. And no big deal, whatever, like not the end of the world. But I just wasn't really enjoying it on my own. And I
Hmm.
kind of liked what I was doing on the online platform. And so at that time I was like, well, do I either rehire and keep pushing, or I admit that this thing was wholesaling takes a lot of feeding the beast, and I slow down on this and shut it down. And John was like, I'll buy your company. And I'm like, that sounds like a win. And we're out. So,
I didn't know. I didn't know
um,
John. Bought your company? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a super cool, weird transaction. They bought it for nothing. Um,
Yeah.
and so what they did was 15% year one. I get 15% of their gross, or 15% of their net year one, 10% year two, 5% year three, and I
Hmm.
get first right of refusal on one deal a month, up to one deal a month
Hmm.
for that 3 year period. So I still get, and I just pay whatever their internal fee is, which I think is 5,500, like their marketing, whatever they base
Yep.
their marketing fee is. Um, and so if they lock a deal up, they have to call me, and I go, "Ooh, I like this one." I pay them the 5,500 to their team, and I get it pre wholesaling fee up to once a month in town. So I don't have to run the deal. I still
Yeah.
get to feed my beast, and I still get a small share of the profits for 3 years. And I didn't take a price at purchase, but it'll work out in the long run.
Yeah. It's hard to sell a wholesaling company too for any large sum. So that seems like a great deal. I mean, you could pick up a lot of equity over those 3 years with little effort.
Yeah,
Especially
yeah,
John's a
yeah.
beast at sales, so that helps.
I was gonna say I just have to bank on John being able to do his job. So if he's watching this, you know,
You'll
stop
be
watching
okay.
this and go do your job.
He does good. He's good. You'll be okay.
Oh, John's amazing. He's the
Yeah.
best sales trader out there.
Yeah. For people who don't know, he's talking about John Lalonde, who was on the show about a month or two ago, so you guys can catch that episode. So when you were well, I guess so you went through and you built that whole portfolio, you built that business. Like when did you like what made you decide that it was time to leave your career in the military and focus on this full time?
Um, honestly, it had nothing to do. It's funny. It wasn't really a financial decision or a real estate decision or a. It just came down to like fulfillment. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the Marine Corps wasn't as fulfilling as it used to be, and the platform was. I was having fun when I was working on things for myself and in charge of what I was doing and enjoying all of those things. And I was not having as much fun going to work anymore. We weren't doing the trainings and the deployments and all the stuff that I had loved about the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came time to reenlist, I was just like, it's not as fun as it once was. And
Sure.
so we're gonna go with what's fun. We're gonna
Yeah.
go with what's enjoyable, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then, you know, there are obviously some things that if people are in the military investing, there's different ways to think about it, right? Like I was reading some stuff on your website. I actually didn't even know what some of these things are, but you mentioned something about something called a thrift savings plan and a blended retirement system. Could you just share with people who might not know about those things and what they are?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically our 401k, right? So it's
Okay.
just the military, the federal 401k is the TSP thrift savings plan, and then the reason that's still on there as blended retirement system is that's a fairly new. I think 2020 was the
Hmm.
first year for the new version where they had like a matching contribution, and it goes into it automatically starts in a different version of the TSP funds as opposed to used to like start off in your bond fund instead of like actual life cycle funds that allocate differently based on how old you are. And it has a matching contribution, and it's a retirement system changed a little bit. And so, but it's just as much as I love real estate, I'm definitely still an index fund guy. Like I love 401ks and tax advantaged accounts and
Hmm.
dollar cost averaging and all that. Like, let's be real. It's to all your audience out there. Um, I'm not. You see the sign back here that says like no BS. Um, if you think an index fund is not more passive than real estate, then like read my sign again. You're lying to yourself. That there is not a more passive investment, really, not much more passive than an index fund or a
No.
401k. Real estate and passive income is a really funny sentence because anyone who's owned real estate long enough is like, damn it, when am I going to make money? When am I going to stop getting phone calls? Like, I have an amazing property manager,
Hmm.
but when someone dies in your property, it, it doesn't matter how great your property manager is, it's still not very passive. I mean,
Yeah.
and even if you're an LP investor and you're like as passive as humanly possible on a syndication, you still get your money back every 5 to 7 years and have to figure out where to put it next. And you still
Yeah.
have to either 1031 it or pay taxes. And you
Mhm.
still have to like, it still involves some level of work or thought
Mhm.
to either deal with the tax implications or just the research of what the next fund is. None of that being a bad thing, but I love being a 17, 18-year-old person joining the military and being able to say, hey, put 10% in this fund
Mhm.
and just never worry about it again. And then every time
Yeah.
you get promoted, up it by 1 or 2%. And then the government's going to give you a 5% match. And that's free money. And it's all tax exempt on the front end or on the back end, depending on which way you choose it. And ta-da! Like,
Right.
it's just a nice little bump. And I
Yeah.
think there's something to be said for some diversification. So,
Absolutely.
and you
Cool.
can roll it into a self-directed IRA and invest it, bump it to a real estate investor later as a LP, so, or a private lender.
Gotcha. Didn't know that. Cool. Um, and we were talking a little bit offline about how you do a lot of, or a good amount of creative finance deals. And that's obviously been a hotter topic recently with
Oh
changing interest rates and things like that. Can you give an example of a couple of creative finance deals that you've structured recently?
Yeah, actually, at one point I was trying to do like a high ticket course. I say high ticket; it was still pretty affordable, but on like I called it creative real estate strategies for the buy and hold investor because I think creative finance is a buzz phrase, right? Everybody thinks seller financing, sub two, and assignments,
Mhm.
but I think the real money is in creative strategies, creative
Mm,
investing, not creative finance. Like anyone could sit down and people get so wrapped around like interest rate, amortization, and balloon payment, and they don't realize that the real power is in the structuring and the solving of problems and the actual like the creativity outside of the financing. Like the financing is
mm,
like the last piece of the puzzle.
yeah.
In fact, I think like one of the things I get told all the time when I start talking about creative finance deals is people are like, well, I keep hearing about all these 0% interest things and I, they don't exist. Like I never hear about them. I've never had one. I talk to people at seller financing all the time, and all I get is these guys who agree, but they're like, "Yeah, but I want 6% interest for 10 years with a 5-year balloon." And I'm like, "Okay, well, walk me through your process." And they're like, "Well, everyone says you don't get it if you don't ask. So every property I see on the MLS, I ask, like, are you open to seller financing?" I'm like, "Okay, well, that's a decent, um, like, that's not a bad move." But if you back that out, the people who say yes to that know what seller financing is.
Mhm.
They're an investor and they're going to give you a term sheet that makes sense to them for why they would be willing to take seller financing over just cashing out. The people who have no idea what seller financing is aren't going to take the time to research it. They're just going
Mhm.
to be like, that sounds complicated. I'd rather just take my check. And the agents who don't know it aren't even going to pitch it to their investors.
Mhm.
And so you're barking up a difficult tree. Um, where seller financing really shines is when you really understand like the needs and motivators, and you can come in and you can talk to someone and you can be like, one of the easiest examples to explain this is like you go into a home and you sit down and you do the conversation and you're sitting there and you're like, oh shit, grandma just ended up in hospice in Florida.
Mhm.
You want to be there before she dies and you want to move and you need $10,000 to move to Florida and you need to be there by the end of this week. Okay, your house is, we agree at $70,000. I'll give you 10,000 down. That gets you to Florida, and I'll buy your house at the end of this week. So $10,000 down by Friday next week, exactly like you want. The remaining 60, what if I make you payments of $500 a month for the next 120 months? Well, what people don't think through is like, what did that just do? I just gave that lady a term sheet that is, hey, exactly what you needed, and I'm covering your cost after that. Like that was your mortgage, that was your debt, that was your expenses, whatever. everything's good. You're gonna make your $500 a month, maybe a little bit extra in there, whatever. She wasn't looking for cash flow, but whatever. She got her 10 grand. She gets to move to Florida. She's happy. But I just locked in a zero interest 10-year note. And the problem is that people will come in and say, well, what if I gave you a 10-year 0% interest loan for $60,000? Like, well, that's a turnoff. But if it's, hey, I'll give you 10 grand like you need, and then I'll make you payments of $500 a month for the next 10 years, and I'll pay your house off. And if I can, I'll pay it off sooner, but will that work for you? And they say yes, and you just locked it in with no financing, no interest. There's so many ways to do stuff like that. Now, I haven't pulled that off. Now, I have pulled off, I got it under contract on something very similar to that once, and then the son ended up buying it. Actually, I think they ended up, crazy story, didn't end up going through because the son wanted to buy it, and then someone died. Anyway, so the craziest one that I've actually landed, or my favorite one that I've actually like landed, where this was total proof of concept, we were sticking point on like $5,000. This guy wanted 50. We were like 28, and it was a house that had a grease fire. Had been sitting for like 2 years. They just finished remodeling at grandma's house after she died, and the son moved in, and he was cooking something in like a week and a half after moving in, and he lit the kitchen on fire. And then it sat there for like 2.5 years. And they wanted 50. We were at 28. And then we went back and forth. We came up to like 32, and they were at 38. And then we came up to like 33, and they were still at 38. And I was like, dude, there's no way I can come up above 33. And he's like, well, I'm stuck at 38. So it's either this or nothing. And I was thinking about it. I was like, this is the one that I was telling you about before we got on the call. I just looked at the guy, and I was like, okay. I was like, what if I could do 38? But the only way I could do it was if you let me pay you when the house sold. And he's like, well, what does that look like? And I was like, dude, you're asking me to pay you an extra $5,000 that I'm telling you I don't have in the budget. The only way I can justify doing that is if I'm not having to pay an investor on it, and I'm not having it out of my bank account, and I can use that money towards the rehab to speed the process up. So I'm willing to do that because I know this house is important to you, and I want you to see that I'm serious. But what if I did it and we agreed that I would just pay you that when the house sells, when I'm done renovating it, or in 12 months, whichever is sooner? And he agreed. And so I bought this house for $38,000, zero down, no interest, and no payments for 12 months. The only cost at closing was they forgot property taxes, and he asked if I could cover it. And so I paid $643 in property taxes at closing. And the title. So I think it was like $643 total property taxes plus title closing stuff. And so it was $643 when we bought it. And I didn't have a single cost except for the $90K reno budget debt. And then we went and torpedoed that entire project and went massively over budget and ended up taking 13 months. So I had to pay him back like while we were under contract to sell it. It's so wild. I had to refinance. I was under contract to sell the house and had to refinance it 3 weeks prior to the sale closing. So like we went under contract, and 6 days later I refied to pull enough out to pay him off, just so that I didn't have to deal with him. And the title company was like, you're under contract to sell this. I was like, yeah. He's like, you sure you want to refi? I was like, yeah. Such a weird. I paid him and my private lender off in a refi, and 2.5 weeks later sold it.
And private lender,
which was only like an extra like $700 in like loan fees, so like not a big deal, but it's a pretty funny story of just like basically everything going wrong in a project. And the only person who made any money on that deal, other than my GC and my contractors, is my private lender. I lost like 10, 15 grand. But it's also the prettiest like before and after photos I ever got. And it makes a great proof source for like, hey, look at the work we can do. And even when I lose money, my private lenders make money. So
yeah.
And it's a really cool story for creative financing. But it was like, dude, that house was like, we got in there and it was like, oh, we have to rewire the whole house. I thought it was only this part of the house. Oh, we have to, I mean, it was, you talk about thinking you need to get half the house that had a grease fire and needing to get the entire house. Because we were under the impression when they renovated the thing
Hmm.
4 years ago, when grandma, that whole thing, that they had updated. That's what they told us. Yeah, it was knob and tube through the whole house.
Oh,
So it was good times.
yeah. I think you said something really important there, though, throughout like the examples you gave, is that, creative finance, or I think you called it like creative strategies, like you got to use it to solve a problem. I think a lot of times people come in and it's like the first thing they pitch, but it has nothing to do with like what the seller situation is, doesn't solve a problem. And then they're surprised when the people come back and say, I want these crazy terms. It's like, because they don't really want the seller finance because it doesn't solve their issue. Like, so they're like, well, I'll do it if you pay up, right?
Yeah.
Uh, as opposed to
Yep.
solving the problem first and then making it the solution to the problem.
And the
Like,
funny thing
like in
is,
this
it
case,
probably does solve their problem. You just don't understand how to make it solve their problem. You
right?
don't understand seller financing well enough. Like I had a conversation with a guy yesterday. Well, this person's 75, so seller financing wouldn't work. Why?
No,
Well, they're going to want their money. Are they? Because that means they're going to take a massive capital gains hit. Well, they could 1031. Are you sure at 75 that they want to roll into another property? Well, okay, that's a good point. But what if they still want cash flow? Ding, 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 seller financing. Yeah, but if they're 75, then they're going to say, well, 30 years, I'm going to be dead. Okay. Do they have kids? Yeah. So irrevocable trust for the note. And now when they die, they just guaranteed that their kids are going to get 20 years of 15 years of payments from your seller finance note rather than a savings account of like, figure it out, kids. Hope you're not idiots. Like most
yeah.
parents would prefer that. Like
Talk
it's just how
about
you,
uh, talk about what
yeah.
irrevocable trust is for a note in that scenario.
Oh, that is definitely let me just preference on this that not an attorney and I don't really know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about when it comes to actual trusts. Basically, just saying like,
Yeah.
look, you just have to basically put with a trust you can put an asset, like in this case the note for a
Hmm.
property, into this entity like an LLC, a trust,
Hmm.
and in that you can have, gosh, I forget all the fancy terms, but the fiduciary, the person in the trust, the trustee or whatever, who's in charge of that, be responsible for what happens with the money, right? And so when you're alive, all that money goes to you. The trust pays you. And then you just have it set up to where instead of probate, it bypasses that. That's the beauty of trusts. And
Hmm.
so when you die, the trust will just, now it gets paid out to your kids or to whoever or to what charity or wherever you want that money to go. The trust will bypass the probate process and pay to where you want it to pay via the trustee doing what they're supposed to do as the person in charge of the trust. And so you can set this thing up essentially to where, yeah, you're right, you're 75. If we put 25,000 down, you get 25 grand, much smaller tax bill, 30% of 25 grand, and then you still get the cash flow for the next 30 years. And if you die at year 17 and we still have the note, then for the next 13 years, whoever you designate that trustee to pay will get that cash flow. And if we pay off the note, they'll get a lump sum. Does that not sound better than you having a lump sum that you may or may not blow and you're going to get taxed way heftier? Because here's the other perk to that people don't always think through, right?
Hmm.
Is if you, let's say it's $1 million house, you pay that 30%, you pay, now it's 700 grand,
Hmm.
and you live off that for that 17 years or whatever, and you give your kids the 200,000, 250 that's left, whatever. Cool story. Still not bad. Nobody's upset. Cool. But if you only took 50 as the down payment, and now you have that 950 that you're paying out on the seller carry, and 17 years down the
Hmm.
road, I'm just doing like random math in public, let's say it's 400 that's left in there instead of 250. And they've been paying interest, so there's still interest left on it, whatever, who knows. So maybe it's amortized, so it's probably more like 500 still left on it, but maybe it's 400, I don't know, somewhere in there, 400 to 500 still left on this note.
Hmm.
Well, you
Yeah.
died. So the beautiful thing about this is that your heirs inherit it at base. So
Yeah.
they're not going to pay taxes on that capital gains just got wiped. So whatever is left on that note is not going to be passed through tax wise to them. So you're eliminating half the taxes that would have been paid on that as it gets passed forward to them on inheritance. So like when you think through like the excuse of like, well, they're so old, they're not going to want to really like,
Hmm.
honestly, if they know enough about this and you know how to talk through it, that might be exactly who wants this.
Yeah. Right. Except that person approached it, would you sell or finance the property instead of saying, what are you looking to accomplish here?
And grandma goes, uh, that sounds scary. My agent said I could get a big check. That sounds cool, and has no clue.
Yeah.
They don't know what you're talking about. Why people go for convenience? Yeah. So why would they do all the research on all this crazy complex shit when they could, yeah, take a check? That's the
Yeah.
traditional way everyone understands.
Yeah.
Yep.
And are you well, I guess you're not marketing for deals directly yourself anymore because you sold the wholesale company to John. Are you still marketing or?
Nah, not really. I do some PPL every now and then, but that's about it.
Yeah. And when were you trying to market specifically to any properties that you felt would be a good opportunity for creative finance, or you were just kind of taking it as it came along and the scenario made sense to pitch it to the seller?
Yeah, we always tried to, if the need arose in the conversation, we would try to squeeze in seller carries. And you'd be amazed. I, making sure I'm not lying here, I've never paid more than 15% down on a property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think in most cases it's probably less than 10. And there's a lot of those where there's been, like my 10 unit, I paid 4.9% down and it was a 10% seller carry with an 85% banknote. On, I've done two of those, zero down, zero interest, no payments for 12 months. I've done 100% seller finance. I've done, these aren't necessarily like technically creative finance, but I've done 12, 11, some, I don't, who knows, man. You lose count of this.
Yeah.
11 or 12, some 10 plus something, I don't know, enough. Uh, private lended, right? 100% reno and purchase where I didn't put $1 in and I
Hmm.
either bird out or flipped them. Um, I still consider that creative, right? No bank involved, no money out of pocket. Uh, I've done a lease option, two lease options, and I have been under contract on two sub twos, but they both fell out because my title company hates them and doesn't really know how to deal with them.
Hmm.
And on one of them, called the bank and tipped them off, he thought it was an assignment. So he's like, "Oh yeah, we need your signature," and the bank was like, red flags all over the place. Like called the seller and talked him out of it, and I was like, "Son of a gun!" I'm
Jeez.
like, "You guys are the worst." Uh, and then what else? I've been trying to get a wrap. I've been trying to do a wrap around, but I haven't been able to
Okay.
pull it off yet.
Yeah.
And then, I've done. Here's a fun one. I did one last July. We closed on this RV park.
Huh.
Buddy called me. I got this badass deal. I need 100 grand. It's like, sweet. I want 5%. And then I found him 100 grand. And the guy I found the 100 grand, who friend of mine who wanted to buy a deal, and I put them together. And then I basically brought the two of them together, introduced them to my lender and my LLC creation guy. So I got the LLC created. The only other thing I've done in that deal is I run the Google business page,
Hmm.
and that's it. And they actually gave me 10% equity. I didn't bring any money in, and I might have spent 4 hours on that property since July, maybe five. Um, and that's including three Zoom calls. Uh, so, and we have just about doubled gross revenue on that thing, and it's a
Huh.
$500,000 when we bought it. So, probably a $750,000-$800,000 RV park right now that would probably appraise for 1.2 by the end of a full year at this current revenue.
Wow.
So, pretty sweet to have 10% share for basically making intros. That
Yeah.
same person sent me a deal yesterday and said, I'll give you 5% of this if you can raise this much for the reno or this much for the total deal. And I was like, okay. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And you said you're looking at kind of more of those larger deals now, like RV parks and mobile home parks.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when I can get in with, um, not having to be the ops side, right? If I can partner with somebody who's a good friend, like especially this guy because he crushes it on the ops side. If I can get in with someone like him, where I trust the ops side, and especially if I can get in with no capital, but if I can
Well,
get in with with capital, great. Either way, and I'm not having to run ops, then yeah. But I'm definitely loving the. I think I don't want to say this on recordings, so I'm going to say that I think RV parks, mobile home parks, and self storage are absolutely trash, and everyone listening to this should stay away, especially in like my state. So I'm not even going to mention my state. So if you're in the Midwest, just go away and then buy all the Texas ones because Texas is way better than where I live. Um, but yeah, I think I don't really think real estate is going to be the lead domino for this recession if it does end up turning into a full blown recession.
mhm,
But I do think that it'll still take a hit. And if it does, especially with like apartment syndicator world might take a hit on all the guys who did IO debt or
yeah.
floating rates if they can't figure it out. Um, and if all that stuff takes a hit, I feel like mobile home parks and self storage for sure are a fairly safe bet. When people
Yeah.
downsize, that's where they end up. And I think RV parks too. I think 2020, 2021, 2022, a lot of people downsized to RV parks and van life, and I don't think that trend's going anywhere.
Yeah.
But what do I know, right? I'm just some knucklehead who likes crayons. So,
And I don't really know much about RV parks. I mean, does how long are people like typically staying when they dock their RV at one of these places?
dude, we this is what's crazy about this thing. This is what has me excited about this thing. So this is at Stockton Lake. No,
Uh-huh.
it's not. It's not at Stockton Lake. I'm sorry, I'm confused. It's at Lake Texoma. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if that's actually a lake. I think that's a lake in Texas. I'm making up a name. Um, it's definitely a Texas lake. That's where this RV park is. Um, sorry, I'm just running this way too long. Yeah, so Stockton Lake in Missouri.
Okay.
Um, and super small podunk nowhere. We actually got this thing for a steal because the agent was a knucklehead and posted it as a single family house. A 3-1 double wide trailer, single family house on an acre, acre and a half for 400 and something $1,000. And my buddy was like, alarm bells, ding, 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 ding. What the crap? Like, there's no way there's a single family house for that much in this market. Pulls it up, starts flipping through photos, and he's like, what are all these RVs doing back here? This is an RV park. And
With hookups. Like,
with hookups, yeah,
yeah.
28 pads. With a shop that we've since turned into a 2-1 apartment and a laundry room with coin laundry, with 2 washers, 2 dryers. And so we've added a 2-1 apartment that's rented for $750 and rented the 3-2 out for $875 or $950. I think the new tenant's $950. We just swapped it out last month. And we've added 2 washer dryer, coin laundry, which is probably nothing in reality. Probably brings in like $200 a month, maybe 3. And we just added this week, we just added actual like tent camping, like 10, 12 spots. We
Mhm.
no idea if that's really going to work, but it cost us all of like $2,000, I think, to put it
Yeah.
in. So we'll see. But to put in perspective, this guy only ran it 9 months a year, and we went through the winter last year, and we did have a couple stays, which means that hey, even just being open during the winter, we netted more those months than he did.
Mhm.
So that's great. But it was averaging between 4 and 4,500 a month gross
Mhm.
when he owned it. We're the last 4 months we've averaged about 85 to 95, and one of those was it last month. We had a guy pay 4,450 or 4,400 to stay for 12 months. So he pulled in to book for the full year. And I was like, I looked at Marty and I was like, holy crap. We just had one stall of our 28 pay us what this thing used to make gross month over month. And we still have the house and the 2-1 and the laundry room.
Yeah.
I'm excited about the next year. So,
Yeah.
to answer your question, though, most people, ironically, like there's the weekenders for sure,
Sure.
um, but a lot of the people who message us on like Google are asking about 2-3 weeks, month, 2 month, 3 month. We get
Wow.
multiple long term stays, and we charge $500 a month, and it's not uncommon for them to book for the full month, or multiple months. Not uncommon at all.
Yeah. And how does that work? Do they pay utilities or you include that in the 500 a month?
Uh, no, it's included. Yeah,
It's included. Yeah. Got it. Interesting.
yeah,
Um, and so you're kind of focused on more of those type deals now as opposed to single
yeah.
family stuff. Yeah. And then when you were building your portfolio while you were still in the military, I'm assuming you were doing this remotely because you were stationed in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So how did you manage all of that, including
I just
construction
hired
from
it.
a distance? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do as many renovations, and then I had a property manager.
Yeah.
I did try to do one long distance flip, and I got burned on it. Um, I actually had my wife going by to hand off the checks, but I didn't have her going in the house, and I still got burned, even with her going by to deliver the checks. So, yeah,
Yeah.
not pretty. I definitely am not a fan of the long distance flip or burr game.
Yeah.
I didn't really start getting into renovations until I moved back here.
Okay. So you were buying,
Yeah.
the houses were mostly turnkey, the ones you were handing off to your property manager, or were they handling some reno for you, or?
Yeah, they would do like light, like lipstick stuff.
Okay.
And then I would focus mainly on the like wholesale, or I would wholesale probably like 2 or 3 to 1, and the one would be like a light lipstick or almost turnkey, and I would hold it.
Got it. So
Yeah,
keep the best, wholesale the rest type model.
pretty much. That's it. Yep.
Cool.
Pay for my marketing.
And that's actually a good topic that comes up, right? A lot of times, and you kind of said to yourself, like the wholesaling business can end up kind of just being a feed the beast type of business, I think is the phrasing you use. So how did you make sure that didn't happen in your case? Because sometimes you talk to guys who've been wholesaling and they're like, oh, I've been wholesaling for a few years. I've wholesaled 300 houses. And you're like, how many rentals you got? And they're like, oh,
Mm.
two. And you're like, what happened? Like, that's what a lot of times, like people, why they got into the business, and then the wholesaling business can turn into feeding the beast. So how did you prevent that from happening in your case?
Mainly, I hated wholesaling, so I
Okay.
just didn't really want that to be. And I didn't really. It's not that I hated wholesaling. I enjoyed wholesaling. I hated how much wholesaling pulled me away from other things I enjoyed. Um,
Mm,
so like I have the online community and the brand and like content and like all that stuff, and I really enjoy like this, like podcasting and talking to people and networking and hanging out and doing all this stuff online and educating service members and vets. And I felt more and more and more and more like the wholesaling game was just pulling all the time. It's like, oh,
mm,
you got to run to talk to this seller. Oh, you got to deal with this problem. Oh, here's this issue. Oh, this contractor needs, just everything. It was always something, something, something.
mm,
And it was just stressful.
yeah.
And it just got to a point where I was like, good Lord. Like man, we gotta make sure that we're not doing this thing long term.
Yeah.
I did not enjoy it enough to get sucked into the trap of wholesaling all the time. Like the quick
Yeah.
cash is nice, but man, no thanks.
Yeah. Well, that is one good, if that's one way, right? If you really don't like it that much, that's one way. I
No,
think
nope.
some guys love chasing the deals a little too much, so they kind of
Yeah,
get sucked in their own trap. Uh, that makes sense.
yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about building a mastermind. We haven't really talked with anyone about that on the show, and you've built a pretty successful mastermind that I know quite a few people who are in there. So can you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that and kind of how you went about doing that once you decided to?
Yeah, the why is a good question. I don't know that I should probably think about that answer at some point. I know at one point I was sitting there and I was like, "Oh, this sounds fun. I should." I was in a bunch of masterminds. Is really what it boiled down to. I'd been in quite a
Mhm,
few. They'd all been really impactful to me, and I figured this was the next step within my community. I didn't have any monetization really at all, and I was trying to find a way to monetize. And
mhm,
that's not the reason I started the mastermind, but I was like, this seems like the most aligned way to monetize because I like community, I like networking, and I get a ton out of these masterminds. But the thing that I've noticed is that the free ones always fall apart, and the
mhm.
paid ones actually do well. So I
Yeah.
was like, okay, we'll do one with a little skin in the game. Um, and I thought about it for a while, and it wasn't until a friend was like, "Dude, have you thought about doing this? You should." And I was like, "Oh, okay, someone believes in me. Let's do it."
Yeah.
Um, and so I launched. And it was really affordable. It still is really affordable, and it's just been really cool to see because, like, whew, man, sorry, eating the Irish pub before we hang out. Uh, it's been really cool because, like, the community is so much tighter than I ever thought it would be.
Mhm,
I like the military community itself is always really tight anyway,
mhm,
and the mastermind communities I was in were always really tight. And it's like combining those two things, it's just been crazy to see some of the deals that are getting done, some of the conversations being had. Um, I mean, it's really, really, really cool. There are some just absolute killers in there, and they get so much stuff done, and a lot of them are still active duty and they still have full-time jobs, and they're always willing to help. Everybody in the community is willing to reach down and help somebody else and lend a hand and
mhm.
all these other things. And it's been really fulfilling to be a part of. It's probably my favorite part of the community. As far as like building it itself, it's as easy as finding your tribe and creating a recurring membership and saying come on in, but you got to really dial in the value. And for us, it's Saturday group calls with guest speakers and Thursday night like office hour ask me anything calls that I run. And Monday right now I'm running a creative strategies call, and then we've got small group accountability squads and master classes and tons of resources and discounts, and just constantly trying to add value.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. And you mentioned like networking being something that you're passionate about. Like, how do you think that networking has impacted your real estate journey, or maybe just your journey overall?
Oh, you mean aside from landing deals with no capital?
Yeah, besides that. Yeah.
Yeah. Ask and receive
Hmm.
in way of like introductions or knowledge. Um, a prime example is on Wednesday night. I mentioned to a friend casually, I was like, "Oh man, I love the book Profit First. I wish like it'd be awesome if I could get like Mike McAllowitz to come speak to my mastermind someday." And guess who I just got an email intro to from that guy today, just randomly. He apparently his bookkeeper is in one of Mike McAllowitz's books as a testimonial to or testament to Profit First bookkeeping system. And so
Hmm.
he emailed his bookkeeper, and his bookkeeper emailed Mike directly and CC'd me. It was like, "Hey, this guy would love to have you speak. Think you'd be awesome." And I'm like, "Oh, cool!" Like that was a really casual drinking homemade wine at my buddy's house, smoking a cigar conversation.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Uh, but just networking,
Yeah.
just knowing the right people, being in the right circles, and asking the right questions. And that's just kind of luck of the draw, that one. But got more examples of luck of the draw stuff like that than I know what to do with.
Yeah. I think sometimes people who are, whether it's newer to real estate or newer to anything, they're kind of a little hesitant to go out there and go to these networking events because they feel like they don't know anything. I mean, what's your advice or actionable step for someone to do besides saying just go, right? Maybe something that, you know, that they a piece of advice like when they're there, what should they try to do, right? There's a lot of different approaches, but what would you do?
Not act like they know everything, not puff their chest, just tell people where you're really at.
Yeah.
Be authentic, ask questions, be genuinely interested in other people and their success. Not be an asshole, right? Give value, add to people,
Yeah.
and be there, be willing to learn. Like there's a way to approach and ask questions and learn and that will show people you're genuinely interested without coming off like you're just wanting to be an energy drain. Like the people who I say asshole, but like the energy drains, the time sucks, the pick your brain people. Uh,
Hmm.
if you get to a point where like when the phone rings and your name shows up and I go, oh, like not good. Don't be that guy. Be a constant value add. Ask the occasional question and then just show interest and just hang out and don't just like question, drag. Like just be fun to be around. Focus on building the genuine relationship. Like I don't consider myself to have a mentor. I just have a whole bunch of people that I've built enough of a relationship with that I can reach out and say what's up. And if I have a question, I can ask.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
And for people who are trying to accomplish what you've accomplished, they're maybe in the military full time and they're looking to build a portfolio. What's your advice to someone who's maybe not just brand new, but maybe they got a couple rentals but they're trying to really grow it? What is your advice to them in order to be able to get to where you've been able to get to?
Hmm. Take action.
Go
Surround
do it.
yourself with the right people.
Yeah,
Huh?
go do it.
Yeah. Um, Surround yourself with the right people. I
Mhm.
think, I mean, before we talked, I was going to say like your marketing budget, right? Like, but I think realistically, learn how to filter the advice you receive from other people through the
Mm,
lens of whether or not that person has achieved what you are looking to achieve and lives the life that you want to live. So, would you swap places with them in regards to that question?
mm,
Uh, Probably the best example to drive this point home is that I use all the time is if you want to become a professional UFC fighter,
mhm,
your mom has your best interest at heart and loves you. But unless your mom is Chris Weidman, she's probably not who you need to go to learn about becoming a UFC fighter. You probably would want to hire Chris Weidman's striking coach, Ray Longo, and I only know those names because I have met them. I don't actually follow UFC well enough to know everybody. But you want a professional coach, right? You want a UFC fighting, like you want the Gracie brothers. You want somebody who's actually in that world as a UFC coach. Your mom has your best interest at heart. She loves
mhm,
you. She doesn't want you to die in the ring. But that doesn't mean that she knows how to coach you. So you tune
mhm,
her out and you hire a professional coach. And yet,
mhm,
for some damn reason, when we get into real estate, we're like, I want to buy a bunch of rental properties and achieve massive wealth through real estate. And then your mom, who may never have owned a property in her life, who still loves you and still has your best interest at heart, starts trying to talk you out of it. And you're like, oh, but it's my mom. I should listen to her. And this guy who is worth $200 million through real estate is like, hey, you should do this. And you're like, yeah, but my mom said, okay, ignore her. Who do you want to be in this realm? Like, she still loves you. That's great. Tune her out. Listen to the person who's been there, done that. Like, it's okay to acknowledge that the people who love you are not good at everything. And
mhm.
that while their advice may be based on what they believe to be best for you, if they're not an expert in that realm, you should take it as such and surround yourself with the right people.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's great advice. Really good advice.
Oh, thank you.
Um, so we're getting close to the end here, but there's always two questions I like to ask. The first one's kind of a funny one,
Just do it.
and no, that's the second question.
No.
First one is, what is the craziest or most uncomfortable situation that you've ever experienced in a real estate deal?
Yeah, the craziest would be that single family mailer I sent out that landed me. The guy was like, I want to move to Florida. So if you buy my single family, you got to buy everything. I was like, what's everything? And it ended up being the single family, a 40 unit hotel, a 23 unit apartment, and a 15 unit apartment. So 79 doors.
Hmm.
That's probably the craziest. And I negotiated almost all of that sitting in my car at lunch on lunch breaks from California. Um, the most uncomfortable, dude. I mean, let's be real. I live in Missouri. Like, if I'm going to a house and I don't have to bring this with me, like flashlight, handgun, and knife, like, and for anyone who's watching this on video, it's like an actual like knife. Um, I'm ready. I'm. It takes a lot for me to get like uncomfortable. So when you,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a combat vet with 13 years under my belt. I'm a 225 pound 5'8" dude who looks like he lifts weights for fun. Um, I don't anymore really, so I just look like it. That's the joke there. It's hard to tell because you only see like shoulders up, so I actually do look like I lift weights. Uh, I got the dad bod going on down below the camera, but um, and I'm carrying a firearm and a knife, and so it's not super common for me to get like uncomfortable in the way that I think you mean that question. The
Yeah.
ways that I get uncomfortable are like, dear God, needles or freaking climbing over like homeless things and dead animals. And like
Yeah.
the one
Yeah.
time I went into a crawl space and it was like 7 inches of water that I stumbled into, and like that kind of just like, been in plenty of those situations. But
Yeah.
as far as like fearing for anything, it's like whatever, no one's gonna mess with me. But
Yeah. Yeah. Gotcha.
yeah,
And then, if you could,
just do it.
second question. Yeah. Okay, we'll move on.
Sorry. Can you tell we were joking about this beforehand?
I know everyone else doesn't get it. So,
No, I know it's not funny.
um, if you could go back in time, give yourself one piece of advice when you were looking for your first real estate deal, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
For anyone listening, that's where the punchline would be. Um, Honestly, consistency, man. Um, I mentioned earlier that I was like, how many people answer marketing? And that's what led you to saying that the most common answer is like, just do it or go for it or take action, which honestly is a good answer. It's probably most common because you're right. Like all the talk in the world doesn't matter if you don't start taking action. But taking an action doesn't matter either.
Hmm.
And when I mentioned the marketing thing, what I was getting at is like dumping $500 worth of mailers. You might land a deal if you're lucky, but that'll be it. And if you only dump even $2,000 or $3,000 worth of mailers and you only do it once, it still might land you a deal. But you need to jump $2,000 or $3,000 worth of mailers month over month over month. And then when you start landing deals, you need to crank that to 5,000 and then to 10,000. The guys who are making seven figures a year, they have a $5,000 or $10,000 a month burn rate, or a $25,000 a month burn rate, or a $50,000 a month burn rate. Like they are crushing it with consistent marketing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just have to be marketing, right? It's just consistency. Like the whole point of this is like, I laid off the gas pedal when I moved out of the Marine Corps. Like that 2-3 months, I let off. And when I got back into it and I started rolling back into marketing, it took 3.5 months before I landed my next deal again. And I was like, what the crap? Like this was working. What is going on? And I was about ready to just like throw in the towel. Like, I guess we're done, whatever. And then we landed 6 deals in 48 hours. And yeah, I was like, oh
Wow.
my gosh. And we wholesaled 3 of them and bird 2 of them and or flipped 1 of them. And then we landed 10 more over the next 2 months. And I was like, oh, this is great. So like in that 3 months, we landed 16 deals. I was like, cool. 4 months prior to that, 3.5 months prior to that, we landed nothing. But we made $100,000 in wholesale fees, not including all the flips. We probably made 200-300 grand. But we spent, I don't know. I'm trying to do all this math in public, but you guys get the point, right? Just consistency.
Yeah.
Don't give up on yourself too early.
Yeah.
Give yourself enough runway to start is really the trick there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. If you if you're not consistent with your actions every day, or you just give yourself, you're like, I'm consistent. I was consistent for 3 weeks. Well, I mean, what's 3 weeks? In the grand
Yeah,
scheme of things, nothing. So
yeah,
very cool. Well, if
agreed.
people want to connect with you after the show, or they want to learn more about your community or your mastermind, how can they go about doing that?
Oh yeah. So I got this book called The No BS Guide to Military Life, which um, it's basically everything I wish I'd known about real estate and finances when I joined the military, or about being in the military. Uh, and I have a link that will give you option to download the PDF version for free. So people can go there and download it, or download a copy for them or for their family. If they've got a family member that's in the military, they can send it to them. And then it has right below that all of my social medias. And I found that that is way more effective than what I used to do, is like just tell people, hey, go follow me on Instagram here, that no one would. Because the link is so easy to remember. Check this out. I'm so proud of it. I'm still so happy about this. I can't believe this domain was open. Thebestpodcastguest.com.
Stop. That was available for 10
It
bucks?
was available. It is
Oh
amazing,
man.
isn't it? It is the most
That is the best.
memorable domain ever. So if you go to thebestpodcastguest.com, you can download my PDF for free for yourself or for a family member, but you can also jump in the Facebook group or follow any of the other socials. So
That's awesome.
yeah, I know. I saw it and I
That's
was
so
like,
great.
so I have it linked. It links back to my actual website. It just
Yeah.
redirects, but
Yeah.
I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show today. This was awesome. Shared a lot of great things. I appreciate you being on.
No, thanks for having me. This was a good time, brother. I'm glad we got connected.
Likewise.